So could Delilah, or whoever died in the vents of Sister Location, have been compelled to come there? And this story is just giving us a hint as to how that happened. Maybe. And whereas the Delilah Sister Location connection might just be me reading too far into things, that certainly isn't true for our second story, Room for One More. In this story, and stop me if any of this sounds familiar, Stanley is a night guard at a mysterious underground facility full of little ballerina dolls looking to escape to the surface. Ding, ding, ding! It's like in one sentence we just won Fnaf bingo. Each night he falls asleep on the job, wakes up to find a mini Rena doll on the desk asking to go home with him. Stanley falls asleep again, and when he wakes up, the doll is magically gone. Over the next few days, his arms start to swell, his throat starts to bleed, and yet he keeps going to work, keeps finding dolls, and keeps falling asleep. Eventually, he learns that the dolls have been crawling into his mouth while he sleeps, causing his body to swell to the point of bursting. The end. The moral of this story, kiddos, be a good employee. Don't sleep on the job. Otherwise, little animatronic creatures are gonna crawl into you and make you explode from the inside out. What's also interesting about this story is Stanley's dreams. Each time he sleeps while on duty, he has himself a strange dream. In the first, Funtime Foxy is a cab driver. In the second, the facility's power cuts off and he comes face to face with Funtime Freddy. And in the last one, Ennard is a dentist and Ballora is his dental assistant, which I would say is one of the strangest things to ever appear in this franchise, but then again, I turn your attention to this corner where we have time-traveling ball pit, anime Foxy, Yandere Chica. Anyway, this one is pretty obvious, right? Stanley is working at Circus Babies Entertainment and Rentals, that underground facility from Sister Location, and the dolls crawling into his mouth are a parallel to Ennard using Michael's progressively decaying body as a skin suit in that game's secret ending. I think this story might be trying to give us a more realistic interpretation of those events, or something that more closely matches what we see happening in those ending cutscenes. That instead of Michael being scooped and having his skeleton removed and all of that at the same time, that our protagonist Michael instead is being slowly filled up with animatronic pieces night after night, giving him that progressively sickly look that scares all the people around him. Stanley's story even mentions this, quote, "He staggered and stumbled down the sidewalk. Passers-by stared, some seeming worried, others just annoyed, like it inconvenienced them to see another person suffering," which feels right on point with how those cutscenes were depicted in Sister Location. But okay, of the 3 stories in 1:35 a.m., it's story number 3, New Kid, that's the most exciting to talk about, at least for today's episode, because this one gets to the heart of what is still to this day the single biggest question of the series, and that is the identity of Golden Freddy. Let me tell you, I thought we had this one pretty well nailed down, that it was Cassidy, aka the vengeful spirit from Ultimate Custom Night, and yet this story, well, it causes me to question a few things about our conclusions. First, let's go through a quick summary. Devin is a 9th grade social loner alongside his only friend Mick. One day, a new kid in school named Kelsey shows interest in spending time with the two of them. Kelsey is good looking, he's charismatic, he immediately attracts the attention of all the cool kids in school. And even though Kelsey, Devin, and Mick all get along as friends, eventually Devin gets jealous of Kelsey, because Kelsey has everything that Devin wants. And so to get some revenge, he lures him to an abandoned Freddy's restaurant long forgotten at the outskirts of the town. His plan is to trap Kelsey in a spring-lock suit for a few hours to scare him, but, well, you know what's gonna happen. The sheer mention of spring-lock suit immediately gives you a spoiler alert as to what's gonna go down. Kelsey puts on the Golden Freddy suit and gets skewered alive, quote. The blood saturated the bear's matted fur in seconds and began pooling on the floor. Devin stared at the moving blood. It looked like it was a living thing. A thinking red liquid lake stretching out. End quote. Mick and Devin leave Kelsey for dead for fear of Devin getting in trouble, but they're not quite sure he actually died. Nearly a week later, Devin is convinced to go back and check on Kelsey, but when he does, he's in for a surprise. Kelsey has vanished. Devin eventually sticks his hand inside the suit's mouth to feel around for Kelsey's slumped over dead body, only for the spring locks to fail again and crush his arm. As Devin lies on the floor, trapped and slowly bleeding to death, he gets a final glimpse into the suit and, well, let's just say what he sees inside rocks the foundation of what we know about this franchise. Quote, Devin wiggled in one more attempt to free himself. The mouth opened even more and Devin got a sudden glimpse inside the suit. He gasped. down low, past his arm, Devin could see a body, a dead body, just like he thought he'd find when he came back here to check. But it wasn't exactly like he thought he'd find. This one had curly black hair. The body in the suit wasn't Kelsey. Now, there's a lot of weird things about this story that I don't quite have answers for, but I do have some thoughts about. First and foremost is the ending. You see, the book doesn't end with Devin's death like you would expect. It actually continues to a final scene with Kelsey, alive and well, as the new kid at school introducing himself to two boys. It's and Devin at school, like, oh, this was the fateful meeting that would eventually lead to multiple of their deaths. But it's not. This is Kelsey at a new school meeting two new boys. In the story, Mick meets Kelsey first and then brings Kelsey over to meet Devin, and it all takes place in a classroom. This closing scene, meanwhile, is outside the front doors of a school, and the two boys Kelsey introduced himself to are less social outcasts like Mick and Devin, and more like bullies. We're expressly told that the boys are snickering at the passing kids. Even Kelsey's first line to them is different. It implies that Kelsey has somehow lived on after his supposed Springtrap death in Golden Freddy, and now he's the new kid at yet another new school, introducing himself to two new kids. And the way that this final scene is written, with Kelsey scoping out the two boys from afar before he approaches them, it feels like he's actively targeting loner kids to make friends with. Could this be Kelsey's attempt to befriend kids that most overlook and then lure them back to a Freddy's Pizzeria for some tragic incident to happen? It seems like it would be a stretch, but let's talk about Kelsey himself. Mr. Perfect. Kelsey is a weird entity in all this. Throughout the story, there are moments when his behavior is specifically called out as slightly off. Quote from the book, Kelsey tilted his head and studied Devin for a couple of seconds. For those 2 seconds, Devin had the weird feeling he was being evaluated. And again later, Devin was tempted to stab Kelsey to see if he was a robot. Kids don't say stuff like that. Once they're actually at the pizzeria, things go surprisingly smoothly for Devin's plan. The line in the book even goes like this, quote, this was going even better than he imagined. He thought he was gonna have to talk Kelsey into trying on the Golden Freddy suit, but it looked like he was gonna do it all on his own. It was like it was meant to be. All of it seems to cast some level of suspicion on Kelsey's true motivations, and that's without me even mentioning the fact that his body just goes missing at the end of the book when it has been skewered and bled to death. To me, it feels like Kelsey may just be our vengeful spirit from Ultimate Custom Night. In the story, Kelsey is described as having wavy blonde hair and blue eyes. Now, we have a pretty solid idea that its hair is straight, with a slight wave, and it appears to be blonde. But here's the kicker. This image was created by inverting colors. It's what gives it that blown out and kind of creepy appearance. If you invert the colors of the vengeful spirit's eyes, you get blue, just like Kelsey is described in the book. And it would fit the idea of a vengeful spirit, a kid who is angry about his own death, perhaps in an accident like we see in Fnaf 4, or in this particular story, looking to get revenge on other kids who are similar to his original killers. He goes from school to school, presumably ones near Fazbear locations, to somehow trick kids into getting killed by the suit. The parallels with Vengeful Spirit even go to the moments right around Kelsey's death in the book. This is how it's described, and the sound wasn't the bad part. It was bad, yes, but the bad part, the really, really bad part, was the way the suit started jerking in a spastic, horrific dance. It looked like the moth-eaten, mildew-blotched gold bear was convulsing, but it wasn't the bear, it was Kelsey. It's remarkably similar to the final cutscene from Ultimate Custom Night, where we see again an angry Golden Freddy, presumably filled with the vengeful spirit, twitching off into the darkness. Also worth noting is that the springlock suits are apparently big enough for kids to slump down into the body. Devin, when he initially can't find Kelsey's body inside the suit, decides to dig deeper down into it. Quote, had Kelsey somehow slid down into the suit? Was that his hair that Devin could see? This, to me, confirms what we see in Fnaf 4's storage room cutscene, the strange tuft of hair that's coming out of the body of the suit. Back then, we weren't sure what this was trying to tell us, what that tuft of hair was meant to be. But now, I think we can safely conclude that it is indeed a child stuffed into that body, and that we're only seeing the top tuft of hair poking out. It would seem to imply that there was a victim before the bite of 1983, and that the crying child was somehow aware of at least one, if not multiple, of past victims shoved inside the suits. But all of this brings us to the obvious question of this story: the curly black hair at the bottom of the suit. Who's that? And honestly, I'm not sure. Cassidy, which is what we've been assuming to be Golden Freddy's name this entire time, does indeed have black hair, but it's always been described as long and straight. In the fourth closet, we physically see Cassidy, and she's described as this, quote, "That's Cassidy, a girl with long black hair approached." And in the survival logbook, where we first learned of Cassidy's name, there's this girl who again has long, black, straight hair. And that's something worth pointing out, for as chaotic as the story in this franchise has been for all its iterations, names and hairstyles and colors of the victims seem to be fairly consistent. Susie is always associated with her dog. She has blonde hair with curls and blue eyes. Cassidy always appears to have straight black hair. Fritz always has freckles. The names and the faces of the surrounding characters may change, but the missing children all seem to be fairly consistent in both name and physical description, which is an important detail to keep track of moving forward. So could all of this mean that Vengeful Spirit and Cassidy are two separate entities? That two spirits might both be in possession of Golden Freddy, or that Cassidy isn't really associated with Golden Freddy at all, and is instead the identity of one of the other animatronics? Because in Fourth Closet, she technically wasn't the one who was associated with Golden Freddy. Honestly, I don't know. I need to actually review the evidence for this one, and I encourage you to do the same. The last thing worth mentioning for all of us to chew on is the mysterious slithering that's heard throughout this story. While the boys are exploring the abandoned pizzeria, they hear something inexplicable in the walls. Quote, "While they were in the bathroom, Devin was pretty sure he heard something slithering through the walls. He didn't say anything. From the way the other boys' faces paled, he knew they heard it too. They didn't mention it either." It's never mentioned again. Nothing ever comes of this strange little detail, but it's clearly important because more inexplicable, strange sounds come from the Freddy torso after Kelsey dies. In a later quote, "Did you leave anything else?" He tried to ignore the fact that the scuttling sound was coming from the bear suit. Now, this is after Kelsey has already stopped squirming and twitching. So again, we're left with some mysterious force moving around in the pizzeria creating these sorts of sounds. Is it Ennard? Is it the Stitch Wraith? Is it something else? Like I said, lots to chew on with this particular book, but as you can tell, it's given us pretty explicit information about some of the biggest questions that this series has had. Now it's up to us, as always, to put all those pieces together. And there certainly are a lot of pieces that'll start coming together next time as we start looking into the power of agony and the twisted timeline of FNAF's next newest murderer, the Stitch Wraith.